Hello everyone, welcome to today's video. Today we are going to take a quick session on information security risk management, and this is domain 2 of CISM series. And this video is going to be your one-stop guide for risk management. So let's before we start with the content, let's understand the impact of risk management in the professional certifications. So if you are studying about any professional certification, or if you are preparing for it, you would certainly understand that all the professional certification like CISM, CISA, CRISC, CISSP, ISO 27001, ISO 31000, in each of the certifications they would talk about reducing the risk, managing the risk to the acceptable level. So that is the reason risk management is very important when you are working in a security or cyber security or information security line. It is very important to understand the core concepts of risk management. You can go through the review manuals, but it has too much of content, and most of the time people fail to understand the core concepts of risk management. So in this video, I'm going to clear the core concepts, and by there, if you watch the video and if you complete the whole video, then I can guarantee that you will be able to understand the core concepts, and any questions you will be able to answer. In the exam, they would oftenly twist the questions, and it would be very difficult to answer. Most of the answers would seem correct, but if you have that core concepts, that core knowledge, then you will be able to answer any questions. Okay, so let's move on with today's video. So this is the domain weightage in CISM, and this domain, consists of 20% of the weightage. And I will quickly move forward. So before we move forward, we need to understand some basic terms. If we fail to understand these basic terms, you won't be able to understand risk management. So first is threat. So what is a threat? Threat is any activity which can harm an organization, which can harm an organization's objective. So it can be, um, you know, uh, digital threat, it can be a physical threat, it can be a natural threat. So any malicious activity or any activity which can, uh, you know, stop you to achieve your objectives, or which can provide potential harm to your objective, it is considered as threat. Then next term is vulnerability. So what is a vulnerability? So vulnerability is basically a weakness in your system. So it could be again, natural weakness. It could be a technical weakness, which can help a threat actor to exploit your system. Okay. So basically, let's understand. Let's say if we have a server. Okay, this is our server, and let's say we have a hacker or any person who has a malicious intent. Okay, now to steal organization's data, he will try to hack this server. Okay, so what is the first step when you are going to hack a server? You need to find the weakness in the system. Okay, so you will do your reconnaissance, you will do your due diligence to find certain weaknesses in the system. So that weakness is called as vulnerability. Okay, and if the hacker is able to exploit the vulnerability and provide and put some uh, you know malicious things or malware, or is trying to steal some data and is able to do it, then hacker is considered as a threat. Okay, now I hope I was clear with this example. So if you want, I can give another example for this. So let's say we have a person A, and this is person B. Okay. So now the person A has some grudge on person B and wants to, do some harm to person B. So what he will do, he'll come close to person B and identify what is his weakness. Is it his family? Is it his any object? So if he is able to identify that weakness, that means this person has a valid vulnerability, and the risk of this person harming the person B is more due to this vulnerability. Okay, so this person would be a threat for person A. Okay, the next term is impact. What is the impact? So, like as we have understood the first example on the server. So now, if the hacker is able to steal the data, let's say steal the data in the server, what is the impact of this data being out of the organization? It could be regulatory data, it could be a personal data, it could harm the organization reputation, it could give some monetary loss, it could be a business data which can give some monetary loss, some financial loss. So to understand the loss is the impact. So how much impact this threat would put in the organization when it is able to you know exploit the system. Okay, so that is the impact. Now the next term is likelihood. So likelihood is basically probability. So we need to understand, like, if we have a system, we have a server, how many times or what is the probability of a hacker exploiting and hacking this server. Okay, so for that reason we have to understand the weakness, what are the vulnerabilities, and on the basis of those we can understand how many times a person can go ahead and exploit the system. Okay, now what is a countermeasure? So countermeasure is basically a reactive approach. It is putting the controls on these vulnerabilities. Let's say we are trying to put some control. Let's say we are trying to put an antivirus. Okay, we are trying to network. We are trying to put a firewall. We are trying to put IDS IPS to safeguard this server. So these are all countermeasures so that any hacker cannot get inside our server. Okay. Now, the next term is residual risk. So, to understand the residual risk, we need to understand one more term, that is inherent risk. So, what is inherent risk? As we understood in this example, if I take this example, the inherent risk was a hacker can exploit a system of our server, which is very critical. Okay. Now, once we put the control, we put firewall, we put antivirus, we put other controls, we could put physical security and other things. So after putting these controls, what is the risk which you know can what is the risk percentage, or what is the probability of risk of a hacker getting inside? Okay, so that is the residual risk. So risk before this control is inherent risk, and once we put the control, after that the leftover risk is residual risk. Okay, so just keep this in the mind, and it should always be in the back of mind, is risk can never be eliminated. Okay, it it can be reduced but it cannot be eliminated. So there would always be a residual risk. Okay, so let's say I'll give you again in the same example, I will make you understand that if you have a server, okay, you are saying that my inherent risk was that the server can be exploited by someone outside and our critical data may be leaked. So even if we put n number of controls, okay, there is still a slightest possibility for someone to get inside. Let's say not from outside, any outsider hacker cannot do it, but some of our employee who has access to the same uh, system can go ahead and steal the data, right? Maybe not the data. Some natural disaster can come, and your server can be destroyed and your data can be destroyed, right? So there would always be a residual risk. So any risk you cannot eliminate to the full. It would always be there, okay? So now when we have understood the basic term, let's move to our actual content. So risk management can be divided into two parts. First is information risk assessment, and second is risk response. So during the risk assessment, we need to understand what are the emerging risks in our business environment, and what is our threat landscape. Okay. And then, as I said, we need to understand the vulnerabilities and controls which are there, and what are the deficiencies in this control. And then the risk assessment and analysis. So we'll understand risk assessment in detail in our upcoming slides. Okay. So now the next is information risk response. So once we have all the risks in place and what are the risks in our business environment, what we need to do is treat the risk. What are we going to do about that risk? Are we going to keep it the same, but then the business might get into a loss, and we cannot afford that, okay? And then the ownership of risk, and then how to monitor and report the risks. So risk management is always divided into two phases. One is risk assessment and then risk response. Okay. So what is risk management? Before we get into risk management, we need to understand what is risk. So risk according to ISO 31000. So I will let you know ISO 31000 is an ISO standard, which is lead risk manager. I'm also certified ISO 31000. So risk is an effect of uncertainty on objectives. So what is uncertainty on objectives? So every organization has their own objective, okay, right? We have understood in our domain one that we need to build our objectives, we need to build a strategy to achieve our objective. But what about if something happens which can stop us to achieve our objective, right? So risk is always an uncertainty which is not as per the set path or as per the strategy. So that is what risk is. So sometimes risks can be positive also or negative also. So people often, if we go to a casino to play anything, or if you are playing card games, so you would understand that often taking risk is also converts into positive terms. But we can't take that risk also to makes to understand that if it is a positive effect or negative effect. So we'll always have to reduce the risk so that negative effect doesn't help. Some organizations are going to take risk. That's how, residual risk, we need to accept our residual risk, or how the risk treatment happens. Everything would define whether it can, give a positive impact or a negative impact. But most of the time, we need to be ready for the negative impact. Okay. Then the risk management. Risk management is a process aimed at achieving an optimal balance between realizing opportunities for gain, minimizing vulnerabilities, and reducing potential for loss. Okay. This is how what we have understood earlier, right? So we have to understand what are our opportunities to gain something from this risk, okay? And if we need to do our cost benefit analysis, if this gain is more important for an organization than the loss, then we can keep the risk as it is. But we have to understand we need to minimize our weaknesses and reduce the potential for loss. But because losses can often, make smaller businesses bankrupt. So most of the smaller businesses who don't understand their risk and who don't work to treat their risk, they would oftenly get bankrupt. Okay. So one second, please. Yeah, so we were understanding risk management. So this is usually accomplished by ensuring the impact of threats exploiting vulnerabilities is within the acceptable limit at an acceptable cost. So as I said, we need to do our cost benefit analysis and we need to understand how the threat can exploit the vulnerability and how we can, reduce it, how we can uh, go ahead and remediate it so that, uh, you know, it doesn't impact our day-to-day business and it doesn't give us loss. So, okay, again, a very important point is often people think about risk management is different from is similar to managing the risk. Okay, but risk management is very different from managing risk. So managing a risk is mitigating the risk or providing risk response or giving risk treatment. But risk management is overall how a organization approaches the risk, how they are doing the analysis, how they are doing the evaluation. But managing risk is something different, which talks about how we are managing a particular risk. Okay, risk management is talks about the overall risk landscape of an organization. So this is a very basic understanding of risk. Okay, what is a risk? So this diagram, if you remember, you can understand the core concept of risk. As I said during the beginning of our my video that I would work and I would explain you the core concepts and you will be able to understand what is the risk. So basically, as we have discussed, threat exploiting a vulnerability. Okay, so if there is a weakness in a system, there is a threat also to exploit that weakness. Okay, so that if we have threat multiplied by vulnerability, so and then we have to find the impact of that threat. If the threat is able to exploit the vulnerability, what is the impact which an organization will have? What is the impact if what to our business? Okay, and then how many times or what is the probability of that threat exploiting the vulnerability? If we are able to, multiply this impact and likelihood, then we would get our risk. Okay, what is the risk? What is the impact of the risk? What is the magnitude of the risk? Okay, so this diagram, remember this diagram, and you will be able to understand the basic of risk management. Okay. Okay, so let's move to the next slide. Okay, difference between enterprise risk management versus information security risk management. Okay, as the term says, enterprise risk management, this would deal with the overall risk management activities for the organization. Okay, so as I said, ISO 31000 would talks about the enterprise risk management. Okay, for the overall organization, whichever business is an organization could be in, but the enterprise risk management would always be there. And information security risk management, it falls under enterprise risk management, is a subset of enterprise risk management function, and it majorly deals with the risk related to information of an enterprise. Information could be physical or it could be digital, but this deals with only the information assets or information of the organization. So this can be proactive and holistic, and this is mostly reactive and siloed because this is always deals with the only the information, so it is always siloed. So enterprise risk management would always deal with strategic risk, financial risk, legal risk, operational risk, economic risk, environmental risk also, social risk also. So all these types of risk they would work on. Okay, because an organization has an impact to the society, to the environment, to our economics, to legal and regulatory requirement, to financial requirements. So enterprise risk management would cover all these risks, whereas information security risk management would cover with majorly digital threats like unauthorized access or physical security access to the data, information exfiltration, disruption to the information system. So information security risk management is always a subset of enterprise risk management. Okay. Now this diagram is also very important. So if you understand this diagram, you will understand the whole risk management process. Okay. So this is always a cycle. It keeps on going. So first stage is risk management. Okay. Risk identification. So first stage of risk management is risk identification. So we need to identify our risk. We need to understand our landscape, we need to understand our business environment, and then identify what are the risks we which can affect our business. We can do it from various techniques. Okay. We can do it through knowledge, skills, experience, through brainstorming, through threat modeling. There are a lot of terms through which risk identification is being done. Okay. But I will understand how basic risk identification can be done in terms of information security. Then the next is risk analysis. What is risk analysis? So as I said earlier, we have threat, we have vulnerability, we have impact, and we have likelihood. Okay. So threat exploiting the vulnerability, and what is the impact of that threat exploiting the vulnerability, and what is the likelihood. So all this would considered as a risk. Okay. So risk analysis is basically all about, finding the impact, finding the likelihood, and, more majorly vulnerabilities and threats would be identified with during risk identification process. But what is the impact and what is the likelihood of that risk is the risk analysis. Okay. So we can do this through various techniques like business impact analysis and risk analysis. So this process is called as risk analysis. Okay. Next is risk evaluation. So risk evaluation. What is risk evaluation? How is it different from risk analysis? So risk evaluation is always evaluating on few things. One is what is an organization risk capacity? Okay, risk capacity. Then there is risk appetite. Then there is risk tolerance. Okay. Let's say an organization's from a business process, I'm earning $10,000. Okay. So I'm earning $10,000 in a month from a particular business process which I'm running. So my risk capacity is $10,000. Okay. So this is the maximum amount of loss which I can take due to one risk. Okay. So this is my risk capacity, the maximum amount of risk which I can take. So let's say I am getting a salary of $100 in a month. So my maximum capacity to get a loss is $100. Now what is risk appetite? Risk appetite is, let's say, from $10,000, $1,000 I can bear, without any issue. So if I am still getting $9,000 from a business process, it is fine for me. I don't need to, spend more money to save this $1,000. Okay, this is under my appetite. So that much I can bear it. Okay. Now what is risk tolerance? So understand it very carefully. Often these terms are, can be very confusing in exams. So risk tolerance is, let's say, if I have a risk appetite of $1,000, but I still have some amount of, money left in my pocket. Let's say I still can survive without any issue if I have a $1,500 impact due to a risk. Okay, so this is my maximum amount of tolerance which I can do due to a risk. What is the capacity? Maximum amount of loss. So this is the maximum amount of loss which can happen due to a risk. Okay, and risk appetite is, even if I have a $1,000 loss, even if I have some loss, I have this amount of you know money which I can bear. So this is my risk appetite, and risk tolerance is the um, maximum amount of impact or deviation from my risk appetite. Okay, understood? Now, once we have done the risk evaluation, so these three process all together is called as risk assessment. So risk, what is risk assessment? If in exam you get what is risk assessment or any question regarding risk assessment, it consists of three steps. First, risk identification, risk analysis, and risk evaluation. Okay. So remember all these three steps. So again, I will go ahead and tell you, identifying the risk to our business process is risk identification. Risk analysis is analyzing the risk. What is the risk profile? How much the risk would impact our business? What is the likelihood of the risk? That is risk analysis. And risk evaluation is understanding the amount of impact or amount of loss risk can give us. Okay, so this has three terms, which is risk capacity, risk appetite, and risk tolerance. Okay. Now, remember this risk appetite, that is the amount of loss which you can easily bear without affecting your objective or without affecting any of your business process. Okay. And risk tolerance is the amount of deviation from the appetite which you can bear. Okay. And risk capacity is the maximum amount of loss which you can bear from a risk. Okay. After that, your business might go bankrupt, or after that, your business might get into a major setback. Okay. Now, once we have done the risk assessment, the next term is risk treatment. So after we have done the risk assessment, we would understand that all the risks which are there for our business process. Okay, let's say A risk, B risk, C risk, D risk. Now each of the risks would have different importance, which we will understand through risk analysis and risk evaluation. So this might be very critical or high. So there are different terms which you can use to profile the risk. So this might be medium, and these two might be low. Okay, so these two have very low impact on our business. So each of the risk would have a different treatment option. Okay, so high might say we need to put X amount of controls. Okay, medium also we would say that we can do some treatment option, some controls, little controls. Low, we can say that yeah, we can still survive, so we will accept it. So these are the terms of risk accept treatment. So we'll understand it in detail in our upcoming slides. Okay. Now, what is risk? Residual risk. So as I said, so here, once we identified the risk, we have got our inherent risk. Okay. Now, from that inherent risk, we will do our analysis, we will do our evaluation, then we will perform some treatment option. Then the leftover risk, as I said, risk cannot be eliminated. I've given you, some good examples to understand that. Now the leftover risk is residual risk. Okay. So we again have to evaluate the residual risk with again the same thing. Once we have identified the residual risk, we again have to do risk analysis, risk evaluation. And if it is in under our risk appetite, what I said earlier, risk appetite is the amount of uh, not loss or amount of deviation which an organization can bear without doing any additional control, without adding any additional control and additional cost to it. Okay, so if the residual risk is under our uh, risk appetite, or we what we can do is we can further keep monitoring it. Okay, so it should not go beyond our risk appetite or risk tolerance, and then again this process goes on in cycle. Okay, and if the residual risk is again higher than our risk tolerance or risk appetite, then we can maybe start the identification, analysis, evaluation, impact, likelihood again, and then again do some further treatment. Again we'll get some residual risk. Again we need to decide if this residual risk is under our risk appetite. So this cycle would continuously follow up. Okay, so you need to understand this cycle to understand the whole risk management landscape. Okay, this is how it works. So remember, risk assessment consists of three steps: risk identification, risk analysis, risk evaluation, and then on the basis of that we'll do risk treatment and the residual risk, and after that we'll have a risk monitoring, which will be a continuous process through risk registers. An organization would have risk registers which would show all the risk and their which will help us to monitor the risk, and this cycle would go on. Okay, I hope I am clear, and this would help you clear your basic concepts of risk management. Now, as I said, we will again explain everything in detail. So next is risk identification. How do we identify risk? So everything can be very superficial, but these are the steps which you can use to identify the risk. Okay. So first of all, what we need to do is identify our assets. So every organization has their own assets, okay, which they use to run their businesses. And it could be tangible asset, it could be intangible asset, it could be some data, it could be some financial assets. So so we need to first identify all our assets which are running our business processes. Okay, so if we are able to identify all the assets, we should not miss any assets. We need to identify them. Now we need to also identify our critical assets. How do we identify our critical asset? Through BIA, which is business impact analysis. So all the assets would go through some BIA process, impact analysis, where we'll identify which assets, if there is any impact or any setback, we which can impact our business majorly. So we'll identify our critical assets. So every organizations would have, let's say if I define on the terms of servers, we would have some development server, some test server, okay? And then we have some production servers, which are running the business actual on the day-to-day activity, which are doing day-to-day activity and which is actually earning some money to the business, okay? So this is our critical asset, okay? The the test assets where we are actually doing our testing or development. So these could not be critical, but still it depends on the nature of business. If it is a very confidential test which you are doing, or if it is a very unique thing which you are doing, you don't want to get it to your competitor, so then this would also be a critical. So you have to do an impact analysis to identify the critical assets. So once we have the critical assets, now basis on those critical asset, we need to identify what is the threats. What are the threats that can impact those assets, which can po- uh, provide potential harms to that assets. Okay. Now, after that, we need to identify or assess the vulnerabilities. So let's say we have a network. Okay, we have a network system which is running our server. So each of these components would have their own vulnerabilities. Okay, So server might have vulnerabilities like it is exposed to the internet through the network, okay? And it might have some weak configurations. It might have end of life, you know, configurations, which end of life software or end of life, hardwares, which are very, which are not being managed, which are not being patched. So these are our weaknesses to the server. Let's say for the network also, we may have weaknesses that it is directly connected to the internet, it is exposed to the internet without any safeguard, and it is it has a very weak passwords. Anyone can get into the network. So these are all our vulnerabilities. So it is not only always technical. Vulnerabilities can also be, very uh, environmental. Like this server is in a zone where it gets it always rains. Most of the times it gets flooded throughout the year. Twice or thrice it gets flooded. So there is always a weakness that water can get inside the data center and harm our server and the data. Okay. Similarly, network, we has may also have a weakness that, yeah, the ISP provider is not reliable. Always we don't get proper internet. Then maybe most of the time, if our consumers are trying to connect to our servers, or our business processes are trying to connect to our servers, it is not able to connect. So that is also weakness. And the threat is like how uh, we'll lose our business, we'll lose our important customers. Okay, we'll lose our, so maybe this, once if the flood comes, the server cost maybe $10,000, and we'll again lose the $10,000. So these are all the threats and vulnerabilities. Okay, now what we have to do is identify existing controls. What are the existing controls which are safeguarding our system? Like for, if we say on the, if we take the flood example, then maybe our server is on fifth floor. So that is one of the existing controls. Okay. Maybe our network would have, second ISP. So maybe that is our existing controls. Okay. But still, there is a weakness, there is a risk, right? As I said, that we cannot eliminate the risk. We may reduce it, but we cannot eliminate. Like for example, if even if we have second ISP, there is still a probability that both the ISP can go down at one go, right? Like if there is a major flood, or if there is a major disaster, then both the ISP can go down. That is again a risk. So even if our server is on fifth floor, water can reach to the fifth floor. Maybe the rain can drip down from the roof and come, and water can get into the server. So risk would always be there. Okay. But by putting this control, we have reduced it to a certain level. Now we again have to assess and see how much impact this risk can put to our system. Okay. Now we are analyzing the consequences. That means, again, the impact assessment, which I said, we will analyze the impact, we'll analyze the likelihood, and this process again goes on. Okay. So once we have analyzed the impacts and likelihood, again, we may have to identify the assets which would have certain threats, may have additional weaknesses. So this again cycle goes on. Okay. So you need to understand there are 5 steps of risk identification. One is identify your asset, identify your threat, assess the vulnerabilities, analyze existing controls, and analyze the consequences. That means likelihood and impact. Okay. So I hope I'm clear till now. Now the next is risk analysis. As I said, risk analysis is all about understanding or analyzing the likelihood and determining the level of risk. Okay. Performing first, we need to perform impact assessment. As I said, what is the impact if this risk occurs? Okay, if a threat is exploited by a vulnerability, if a vuln sorry, I have just said it wrong. So if a vulnerability is exploited by a threat, what is the impact it can put to our business? Okay, so that is the impact assessment. Then how many times this can happen, this threat exploiting the vulnerability, how many times it can happen? So that will give our level of risk. Let's say if our impact is 100 rupees and in a month there twice it happens that this threat, be it anything, is exploiting the vulnerability. So our month single loss expectancy is 200. Okay, that is SLE, which is called single loss expectancy. Expectancy. Okay. Now this would say what is the level of risk. So if our server is of uh, 200 rupees and we are getting an impact of 200 rupees every month, then it would be very critical or very high risk. Okay. So this way we are saying doing analysis. So many of the risks you can't do a quantitative analysis. So quantitative analysis is all about numbers, all about particular numbers, particular figures. But qualitative is always about through certain uh, experience, through certain um, analysis which we'll do and understand that this risk would impact. Like we cannot always measure uh, the reputation loss. Okay, we cannot always measure the customer loss. So in those terms we have to apply qualitative risk. Okay, quantitative risk is always about measuring it. So as I said, this is the formula to measure the ALE, which is annual loss expectancy. Okay, so SLE is single loss expectancy, and A and we need to understand our asset value and then exposure factor. And once we have our asset value and exposure factor, how much time, if it happens, occurs, what is the exposure, what is the loss we'll have, then we'll get our single loss expectancy. And then if we multiply it with 12, then we'll get our annual loss expectancy. Okay. So this is how quantitative analysis is being done. Okay. Remember this formula. There might be few questions on this formula, which is what is single loss expectancy. So it is always asset value multiplied by exposure factor. Okay. And if they ask about annual loss expectancy, so just multiply the single loss expectancy with 12 and you will get the annual loss expectancy. Okay. So this is how we are doing the risk analysis. Now next is risk evaluation. Okay. So risk analysis is different from risk evaluation. As I've already informed you that we have three terms in risk evaluation: risk capacity, risk appetite, and risk tolerance. So risk capacity is the amount of loss an organization can bear due to a risk. We gave you an example earlier, like if we are earning a certain amount of money from a business process, let's say $1,000 a month. So this is our maximum amount of capacity which we can bear due to a risk. Like if it is always, if a risk is giving us a loss of $1,000, that means there is no point running that business process, right? It's better to eliminate that risk, otherwise we are not earning anything. So that is the maximum risk capacity an organization can take. Risk appetite is, out of this $100,000 I can bear $100 loss, right? So without doing any changes, if I, due to a risk, I am getting $100 loss for every month, then I will not put some more money, or I will not try to put some more effort to just meet get this $100. That also we are not sure if we are able to mitigate it to the whole content. Okay, there would still be some amount of risk. So the amount of risk an organization is willing to take to achieve its goal. Okay. Now, still my goal would be then $900 I'm getting, so I am fine with this $100. Now, next is risk tolerance, which says the amount of deviation from a risk appetite an organization can bear. So, let's say if not $100, if in a month, even if I get a $150 loss due to certain amount of risk, I am fine with it. Okay. Let's say I'm running a business process and every month there is the we are running in an area where there is you know a lot of rain comes, or there is, let's say in Japan they might get lot of tsunamis or earthquake. Okay, so due to an earthquake, if people are not able to come to office, or if we get a little bit of loss, like if our some wall hampers or some wall breaks, then I can fix it in $100. So I am fine with it. I will leave it as it is. And still, if not one wall, if one two walls break and I get a loss of $150, I can still tolerate it and I can still run the business. But if it is giving a loss of $5,000, then what I will do, I will try to reinforce the walls. I will try to put some mitigation techniques so that my business is not being harmed and I'm still able to earn some profit, and I'm still able to meet my objectives. Okay. So all these three process till now is risk assessment. Now the next is risk treatment. What is risk treatment and risk treatment types? Okay. So we have four types of risk treatment. So first is mitigate, avoid, transfer, and accept. Okay. So what is mitigate? So as we are say, as it is, you know, very easy to understand, mitigating means, remediating the risk. So we need to implement some controls and countermeasures which can reduce the risk. Okay. Again, I am putting, very much force on this reduce word, because you cannot eliminate the risk. So I am going to reduce the risk. Like I am putting some, as I said on the server, I am putting some, uh, you know, antivirus, I'm putting some IDS, IPS, I'm putting some firewalls, and I'm trying to reduce the risk. In terms of physical damage, I'm trying to put some, biometric access controls. I'm trying to put some ID card access control. So I'm trying to put some controls and countermeasure to reduce the risk. Or you can also modify existing controls to reduce risk. Okay, that is what risk mitigation says. What is risk avoidance? So risk avoidance is eliminate the process or activity. So for example, I my company wants to run a business in certain area, like in Japan. Okay, I'm trying to run a business in Japan. As I said, it's very prone to earthquakes and tsunamis. So but I would see that I have a risk that I know every month or twice a year I'm getting earthquakes and my facility can get damaged and I will get X amount of loss. Okay, but that is above my risk tolerance and risk capacity. So what I can do is I can avoid this activity completely. I can eliminate it. So I won't go ahead and do a business in Japan. I would move to some other country, and I'm avoiding this risk. Okay. Now risk transfer, as it indicates the same, transferring your risk to someone else. Okay. So somehow I will take the same example. My company wants to run a business in Japan. It is very prone to tsunamis and earthquake. Now, what I am going to do is I am transfer this risk. So, if in an earthquake I would have X amount of loss, so what I will do, I will take an insurance of my facility, and I will transfer this risk to the insurance provider. Okay, so I will pay him some premium, but I'm going to transfer it. So if anything happens, X amount of loss, the insurance company would bear. Okay. Or maybe transfer it to some third party. I will just outsource it to the some third party who will run my business for uh, run my business, and I'm transferring that risk. Okay, I'm giving him some amount, I'm paying him some amount, but I'm still able to sustain, and I'm transferring it to someone else. Okay, I won't take the whole loss. I will take some loss. I'll give him some money profit out of it, but I will transfer it the whole risk to him. Next is accept risk. So it says accept risk below risk appetite or level, and then monitor it further. So as I said earlier, we every organization would have a risk appetite. So if the risk is below risk appetite, let's say, if again I will take the same example, if I am earning X amount of money, and if due to a particular risk like an earthquake, I am losing, let's say, Y amount of money every month or every year, but I am fine with that because that is under my company's risk appetite. I'm still earning much money, and I have that appetite in my organization that I can bear it. So what I'll do, I'll accept the risk that it is fine. Even if earthquake comes, I will accept it and I will still do my business in Japan. Okay. I hope I am very clear on this. So there are four types: mitigate, where we will apply some countermeasures, some controls to reduce the risk. Then we'll have uh, so same example, if I take on mitigation, I will apply some reinforce walls, or I will may provide some work from home options, etc. So that is mitigating the risk. Avoiding is completely eliminating the process. I am not going to do business, so I'm eliminating this process. Transfer is transferring it to some other third party or taking an insurance. So most of the questions where you will see risk transfer, the answer would be insurance. Okay. So even if it is other way around, if an organization is taking an insurance for a particular risk, what type of risk treatment is being done? So it is risk response. So risk acceptance is always below risk appetite. So understand, if an organization is accepting the risk, it means it is under its risk appetite. Okay. Okay. Next. Next is what is the process of risk treatment. Okay. As I said, every organization would have their own inherent risk. There would be a lot of inherent risk. Okay. So when we are doing a risk identification, we'll find all these risks, and these would be our inherent risk. Okay. Once we have done the analysis and we have done the evaluation, we'll put some controls and we'll perform a risk treatment. Okay. If we are putting some controls, or we are trying to avoid it, or we are trying to transfer it, or trying to accept, after doing the risk treatment, the amount of risk left is residual risk. Okay. Again, further risk assessment process will follow, and if the residual risk is below the org's risk appetite, it will be accepted. Okay. So this is whole key concept of risk management. If you understand this whole process, you will be able to understand anything in risk management. And this chapter, this domain is very important if you are going to do any of the certification. Most of the certification would have at least one chapter of risk management. Okay. So just understand it carefully. If you have still some doubts, you can just go through the video again and understand. Okay. Next, we'll move to some question and answers. So first question is, which of the following is most helpful for determining which information security policies should be implemented by an organization? So most means the which is the topmost priority. So which says most helpful for determining which information security policies should be implemented by an organization. So now A is vulnerability assessment. So vulnerability assessment won't help you determine that which policies would be implemented. So it only give you the weaknesses. Okay. So through that weaknesses, it doesn't mean that that weakness would have a big impact on your organization. You already may have some control. So vulnerability assessment is not the correct answer. Then we have industry best practices. So it could be the one that what policies we are putting, but as we have understood in our domain one, policies are never been created on any best practices. Okay, it always you know shows the organization's objectives, the what is the objective and goal of the organization, what is the intent of the senior management for an organization, what is the mission and vision of the organization. Okay, it could be different from same companies which are running in an industry. Okay, so this is again not the correct answer. So third is risk assessment. It could be the one. I'll cross this out so that it don't give any confusion. Next is business impact analysis. So business impact analysis we would do to perform, uh, you know, uh, to identify our critical asset, to do our risk analysis, other things. So this is part of risk assessment. BIA is also a part of, even A is also a part of risk assessment. So we have to take the best out of these four. So the answer is C, risk assessment. So to create our policies, always we have to understand the risk. The board have to understand the risk. They have to get a risk assessment done, and according to those risks, we have to implement or we have to build our policies so that this risk can be eliminated through some of the policies. Okay, so answer is C. Now, when choosing the best controls to mitigate risk to acceptable level, the information security manager's decision should be mainly driven by. Okay, so I'm trying to mitigate a risk to an acceptable risk. So I have a risk, and then let's say I'm an information security manager, and I'm trying to mitigate it. But what would affect my decision? What would So it says control framework. So what is a control framework? It is all the list of controls which my organization have. But if we are trying to mitigate any new risk for which we don't have a control framework, it won't be more helpful. Okay. Then we have a regulatory requirement. It could be the one. Okay. I'm just crossing it out. It looks, very promising. And again, we are saying best practices, which I said, those best practices could be different from different organization. And D is cost benefit analysis. Okay. So I have to choose from B and D. So I am crossing out A and C. So now in the exam also you have to apply the same methodology. So whichever answers you feel is not relevant, just cross it out in your mind. And now you have only two options rather than four options to choose. Okay. So first is regulatory requirement. So it says best control to mitigate risk. So regulatory requirement won't be helpful for you mitigating the risk. It might highlight some of the risk to your organization. Maybe meeting some of the regulatory requirement is again a risk. As in the domain one, we have understand compliance should also be considered as a risk. So this is mainly a kind of risk, okay, to your organization. Now, to understand if, let's say, if I take only this example only, if regulatory requirement is a risk, what we'll do? We'll do a cost benefit analysis. So to meet this regulatory requirement, we have to invest certain amount of money, let's say X amount of money to meet this regulatory requirement. Okay, so this is our cost. Now, if we don't meet this, then we say still let's say we are losing Y amount of money. So if Y is less than X, why an organization would put effort and money to mitigate that risk? It will leave it there. Okay, so if I am losing some amount of money which is very less than the controls which I am going to put, then I will leave it there. So it will always be cost benefit analysis through which an information security manager decision would be driven by how to mitigate the risk and what are the controls. So we have to understand the cost and we have to understand the benefit out of that cost. Okay, I hope I'm clear. Next, let's move to the next question. Which of the following is the best course of action if the business activity residual risk is lower than acceptable risk? So what I have said in my previous slide, if the residual risk is lower than the acceptable risk, the risk appetite, then always accept the risk. Okay, so what are the answers? Update the risk assessment framework. Okay, review the inherent risk level. Why would I review the inherent risk level? We have already reviewed it, and then we have put some mitigation and risk treatment, and now we have the residual risk. So we'll cross this out. Review the risk probability and impact. Again, this process we have already been done in the risk analysis, and then we have put the risk treatment, and we have found that residual risk is lower than our risk appetite, acceptable risk. Okay. Update the risk assessment framework. Okay, now, if risk assessment framework, what is a framework? Framework is a structure of doing the risk assessment. As I said, identify the risk. Assessment is what? Identify the risk. Now, do the analysis, risk analysis, do the evaluation. That is what the risk assessment framework is. Okay. Now, why would I update it? It's already, I think, effective. That's how we are getting the residual risk and everything. Okay. So this is also crossed. Next is monitor the effectiveness of control. Okay. So now once I have the residual risk, I have it lower than the acceptable risk level. I it is under the risk appetite. My business have accepted the risk. Okay. So now what I am going to do is monitor it. As I've said in the previous slide, monitor the effectiveness of the control. If the controls are effective enough to put this risk to the lower than our acceptable level. Sometimes controls become old, and the residual risk can get higher from our acceptable level. So we again have to go ahead and put some other control. So the answer is monitor the effectiveness of control. Okay. So that's all for today. And if you like my video, if it is helpful to you, please like, share, and subscribe to my channel, which is InfoSec Group. And I will see you guys in my next video. Thank you, everyone.